Remember the fellow who used to sell the steak knives? And there'll always be something more. Well, let me ask you a question. Only I do have a serious solution to the problem. Do you want to stop simply surviving from week to week? Would you like to secure your family's financial future? Would you like more time and money to spend with your family? Would you like the freedom to live the life you want to live? Well, if you answered yes to any of those questions, and I'd imagine you probably said yes to all four, well, there's a book out that can help you do just that. And a book that really is full of, the sort of advice that's easy to take on board and not all that hard to implement. Of course, for any success in life, we have to put in some effort, have to put in some work. But the book is called Real Money Advice for Families. Written by a couple who practice what they preach. So let's introduce the he side of the couple if we can. Wilson Luna. Good evening, Wilson. How are you?
G'day, Graham. Thanks for having us on the show, mate.
You're not having a blue with the missus at the moment about pocket money, are you?
No, mate, no. All good. All good.
Because I'd imagine, just before we start talking about the book, and first of all, congratulations. It really is a terrific book that, all ages and even, dumb disc jockeys like myself can understand. But money is the thing that we probably argue about more than anything else in a relationship.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's one of those areas that, we only notice it when things are going wrong, or things aren't going exactly how we need them to be, and as much as, we all know that the important things in life are other things like health and relationships, etc., it does contribute a lot to what we're able to do. And unfortunately, we only discover that once something goes off the rails. So, yeah, we do argue about it a lot, and there's a high correlation, unfortunately, with a lot of arguments within couples. And money. So, yeah, totally agree.
Now, very often in a relationship, and by that I'm talking about at the stage when they're either living together or married, generally you'll have either he or she who's just that little bit more dominant, so that they'll say, we'll look after the bills, we'll do the accounts, etc., and the other one too often just says yes, and if you ask them about paying bills or how the accounts look, they've got no idea. Is that bad advice? Should both sides make sure that they're up to date on what bills are due, how bills are being paid, and even down to the function of either using the electronic payments over the phone or what have you? Because I know couples where he or she have got no idea.
Yeah, look, that's a great point, and it's one that we bring up. In the course of writing the book, we sort of thought, okay, what's the best way? I mean, let's face it, not all couples are the same, and that's part of the reason why a lot of them get along, because their opposites do attract in a lot of cases. So we say, okay, how do you allocate who does what within from a money perspective? And there's a few, I suppose there's a few regulatory things. And number one is we always say, no matter what you do or who does what within the money spectrum, whether you pay the bills online and the other person is better at the budgeting side, or you're better at the investment side, i.e. what super you choose or your insurances, etc., and the other person is just better at coordinating things or getting all the paperwork in order. The main thing is that when we're talking about family finances, ensure that both couples are accountable for what's happening, or both couples are fully aware of where they are, where they want to go, and at least try and put some flag posts in between or some pointers in between to know when they're off track. That's the main message we want to get across, which is, okay, great, certain people do certain things better than the others, but both of them need to be aware what's happening with the family finances. It happens all too often that down the track, one particular person, one side of the couple says, you know what, we've got into debt in this and this side, or we can't afford to pay this, or the kids, we're going to struggle to get them through the school we wanted. And the other side of the couple actually had no idea that they were in that situation, and that's the scary part, because generally research shows that when a family works together or in unity to get where they want to go to, the success rate increases exponentially. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I suppose, and I'm going back a few years here, you would go to work and you'd get a pay packet at the end of the week or the fortnight, so you physically had cash in your hand, and your wife would do the same. She'd physically have cash in the hand, and you'd bring 2 pay packets home and you'd decide how that money was going to be allocated. Whereas these days, we don't have a choice. It automatically goes into a bank account. Is that base one? Do we start off, if we're, as I say, either living together or married, that both pay packets go into the one bank account to cut down on excessive bank fees and access charges and all of that?
Look, that definitely helps at times, yeah, and it is one of those factors, and it depends a lot on the type of relationship you have. But generally speaking, yeah, you will cut down on fees, etc., by having the single bank account. Above and beyond that, though, we also look at, okay, managing your finances. There's so many little aspects to it, and we always assimilate it, or we use the analogy of a gym membership. I mean, I'm really bad physically in terms of how to maintain myself, health and fitness wise. So I take that as the analogy. And I always, you listen to a lot of shows or you watch a lot of you read a lot of magazines, and the one thing you hear is go to the gym, do some weight training, do some aerobics training, eat this, don't eat that, and it gets all too confusing at times. So what we've done is we've said, let's get it really simple. Let's break it down into 4 really easy to follow steps. So depending on where you are is what you should be doing. So we've said, okay, how do we break it down? People are either, step 1 is if you're in debt, don't worry about things like wealth creation or anything like that. Worry about getting yourself out of that debt.
Yeah.
Then we say, okay, once you've got yourself out of that debt, again, don't jump into wealth creation. It's time to protect, especially that if we've worked for the last 10 years or 5 years and we've built a little bit of capital, make sure we protect ourselves against that, against losing that, i.e. losing it against things like redundancies, potential redundancies, particularly in times like these, in the type of climate we're in. Protect yourself against things like potential sicknesses or a problem happening to your spouse.
So are those sorts of things like insurance against loss of wages or health insurance, are all those insurances worth taking out or what?
Look, again, it all depends on your particular circumstances. Because some of them also aren't based on insurance. There's certain things like protecting yourself against a redundancy. That's like open up an emergency fund. We call it an emergency fund, and make sure you've got enough set aside. So knock on wood, it doesn't happen to you, but you happen to lose that job and you've still got the mortgage repayments coming in. You've got that little buffer on the side. Well, you don't have to go through that, anguish of, I need a job in a hurry because I don't know how we're going to pay next month's mortgage. In terms of insurances, there's obviously, your life insurances, your health insurances, your income protection insurances, and they will all depend on your particular circumstances. And that's another thing that pervades most of the things that we advise on, which is make sure you get to a good understanding of your circumstances, because you need to guide your own ship. You know what's missing in your particular family. No one knows better of what you need. Maybe you're in a situation where, you don't need certain types of insurances and you need other types of insurances. Maybe you're in a situation where you say, look, you know what? I've got my house paid. I've been working 30 years. I've got most of my assets. We've already got enough in the bank to protect ourselves, and maybe you need a lot less than the next guy. But you need to know where you are in order to see what you need to protect or your circumstances, what needs to evolve from there.
With that protection buffer that you've been speaking about, again, is that something that we look at like an account, like open a separate bank account and put a little bit away each pay period? Exactly.
Yeah. And there's some really interesting stats out there at the moment, and one of the ones that comes to mind is, so people usually ask me, look, I've got a job that's paying, let's say, $80,000. How much should I put aside? And it's $1 million question. And there's a lot of research at the moment that seems to indicate, and one in particular says that you should grab the amount that you earn, i.e. lots of $10,000. Let's say you earned $80,000. And it would roughly take you, and this is obviously an approximate value, 8 months in order to get a job of equivalent nature. So that's one of the ways that you would know, okay, I would need 8 months stashed away or put into one of these, like you said, high-earning savings accounts in order to, if something was to happen, knock on wood it doesn't, I've got enough there to get me through that hurdle.
Because that's a big thing in a person's life, isn't it? Okay, you might be travelling along and you think everything is great, but then one day the boss calls you in and for whatever reason says, I'm sorry, your job's finished. And it's like hitting a brick wall. And I think if we're honest, we've all been through it at different stages in our life. And you walk out and as you say, you're earning 80,000 today, so unless you're a really extraordinary person, you're living an $80,000 a year lifestyle. Whereas when you're back earning 40,000 when you're much younger and less experienced, you're living a $40,000 lifestyle, and those who are on 200,000 or 400,000 a year are living in that lifestyle. So when they hit that brick wall of not having the job, it's very hard to maintain that lifestyle. But that's where their body and that's where their soul and that's where their being wants to be at what they were just earning, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it goes so. Totally agree. Not only that, it goes way beyond that to an emotional level.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, we tend to, I suppose, emulate our identity to the job we've got, and we all know it shouldn't be that way, but so many
it's human nature.
And it's a really interesting, and that's one of the reasons why when we looked at it, part of this process was what's unique about the circumstances we're going through now, and one of them is exactly what you said. That redundancy side is one that is probably going to become more prevalent, although, statistics that are coming out now, the last unemployment figures tend to indicate opposite, which is great.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of transitional, let's call it redundancies, where certain individuals, certain roles will become non-existent as they have in the last 20 years. Yeah. If we look at the general job roles 20 years ago compared to the type of work that's available now, they're very different. And that's one of the areas that we've also addressed. So we've said part of your investment, we always think of investments and we always say investments should be, are they in stocks, are they in property, are they in...
Blue chip is what you should stick with.
But you know what we said, we've even gone a bit further and we've said, let's relate it to these circumstances, and there's no better investment that we make, and it's something that I know when I was growing up, my father never told me this because it was a different era, but we've sort of changed it and we've said the best investment you can possibly make is in yourself. Invest in yourself. Invest in that retraining. Invest in that part that, knock on wood, it doesn't happen, but if it did, you're prepared for it. You're not starting from zero again. Yeah,
but also, Wilson, you go back to your dad's era and my mum and my dad's era. If they wanted something, if they couldn't afford it, they'd lay by it. It'd be paid off before it was brought home, in other words. Yeah. Whereas now credit is so easy, and you've got major supermarkets who'll say, hey, you've just moved into a new house, Mr. Luna, you're going to need furniture, so why don't you get the bedroom fittings and the lounge fittings and the kitchen and everything else you need, and you don't need to pay 1 cent for the next, in some case, up to 4 years. And, 4 years, a lot can change. And if at 3 years and 10 months you lose the job and it's not just no income coming in, but suddenly a whole heap of bills, and those bills, as you know, if they're not paid on time, are then going to probably accumulate an interest rate of 27%.
Go over by one day and you could be in major trouble. Yeah, I totally share your thoughts on that, because not only that, we have changed as a culture, and if you look at our average debt levels compared to, let's say, when our parents were
they're
frightening.
Younger,
and now we're in a very strange situation, and this is, I was having a chat with a very good associate of mine, and I just said, only 2 months ago we were looking at the economy and we were saying we're worried about losing jobs. Only last week we've realised, okay, unemployment seems to be intact in terms of, it's going the other way, thank God. But because of that, the Reserve Bank's worried that we're suddenly getting an overworked economy, and they're beginning to put the brakes on in terms of raising interest rates. Now, with the amount of debt levels that we've got, that could prove to be quite dangerous for a lot of families that have put themselves in that.
Yeah, certainly no names and no pack drill here, but I was talking to a 23-year-old about a fortnight ago. He and his new bride, they've just taken over a $1.1 million loan because they've moved into a new house. And I said, how are you going to service that now? Sure, he's on reasonable money at the moment, but it's about 60% of their combined income servicing the mortgage at the moment. Now, that's for 50 years. Now, if she drops out of the workforce to have a baby, or 2 or 3 or what have you, as you'd expect in life, or if circumstances change, now, they're the sort of couples who, while I don't wish it upon them, I wish them nothing but success, but they're at high risk, aren't they?
Yeah. Again, it's like you're saying, we've unfortunately inherited at times a culture of, buying things without our own money, and we're buying it with a lot of credit. And it's hard to get around it because as a whole society, we've done that. And, part of that is, I suppose, that's what contributes to our good nature, particularly as Australians. Our good culture revolves around, look, if we can afford it now, why not? Whilst traditionally, like you were mentioning, your parents would say...
Oh, I don't know what happened there. Can you grab him back up there? Because I don't know what caused that line to drop out, but we'll get him back up. In the meantime, we'll just take a quick break. Our guest tonight, Wilson Luna, author along with his wife of Real Money Advice for Families. 13 12 69, our number. Talk tonight.
1269 2SM.
Sydney Moves with 2SM.
It's all right, that gremlin has been shot. We were right in the middle of talking about the times when people could afford things before they bought them, as against people taking easy loans and reduced interest rate loans, etc. My guest, Wilson Luna, who, along with his wife, has written Your Family, Your Money, Real Money Advice for Families. Sorry about that. You're mid-word and suddenly a dial tone came up.
That's okay, mate. That's fine.
I can tell you that gremlin has just been shot.
Thanks, mate. Thanks. I think the point we're chatting about was, I suppose a lot of families have to identify at the moment. I know we get a lot of, I suppose, our clients, our personal clients, that are coming to us saying, what happens, or we would find ourselves quite tight if interest rates suddenly shot up by another 2% or 2.5%. What do we do? And it's one of those unique situations because the part of the GFC, as people like to name it, is that we're sailing in uncharted waters at the moment, and we're in a unique situation where we have to expect the unexpected. I.e., like I was saying, 2 months ago we were worried about unemployment. Now we're not worried about that anymore. Now we're worried about interest rates going.
But with due respect, I can remember former Federal Treasurer Peter Costello going on programs all around Australia, including this one, and saying, sure, it's easy to get credit. It'd be very nice to go out there and buy a house, but if you're going out and taking on some debt, factor in 2-3% interest rise, and if you can't absorb that, well, maybe you have to downgrade your expectations. And then over the last 48 hours, we've had the head of the Reserve Bank, Mr. Stevens, going out and saying, look, we have to get back to, I think his words were, sensible or more realistic levels of interest. So in other words, interest is going to go back up. Yet again, we'll have people who will just go, oh, she'll be okay. And then when they get into trouble, as you know, Wilson, they want to blame government or blame everybody but themselves.
Yeah. Oh, look, I couldn't agree more, yeah. And unfortunately, in times like these, those sudden changes are more likely than not more likely. All we would really need is a few more signs that the economy has done the turn, and we would be expecting, a lot of the analysts are expecting 2 percentage points rises over the next, 4 to 5 months.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But as you know, and I know we're getting a little off centre here, but you got people going out and buying a house these days, and they've got no savings at all. They've got nothing to put towards a deposit, because you'll find a bank that'll give you 110% for a loan.
Yeah. Add on to that the first home grant that have been given out, and might look, I suppose, from personal.
Then you got to go and furnish it.
Yeah, look, one of my fears is that we've artificially inflated the property market by a lot of the stimulus. That's just a personal view, and there's a lot of different views out there. But if we have, and suddenly we cut it out, there always exists the possibility, particularly if interest rates start going up, that a lot of people for the first time might be experiencing some negative equity in their properties in Australia, some serious negative equity anyway.
And how about those things at the big department stores. We don't need to name them. They're fairly well known, but they'll advertise that you can effectively furnish your entire house and nothing to pay for up to 3 years. Are too many people falling for that trap?
It's interesting when one looks at those, and we've looked into that area a fair bit, and although there's some legitimate offers out there, there's also the other side, and this is what we always tell consumers. We say, from a consumer perspective, make sure you look at the fine print. Make sure also that you compare prices, because there's no free lunch.
No.
And in some cases, and I use the word some because I've seen legitimate offers out there through certain chains, that actual interest rate is actually loaded within the price that you're paying.
That's right.
So you're not actually getting it. Above and beyond that, if you look at please look at the, and we always urge our clients, please look at the fine print about what happens when you go over month 48, one day over month 48.
That's right.
That's where it gets really, really scary. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't budget for that, and they get closer to the period, and for whatever reason, something happens in their lives that they're not able to make that payment in that right time, and all hell breaks loose.
That's right.
That's a concern with that, so yeah.
And they're going to finish up paying interest for the entire term of the loan, aren't they?
Yeah, well, sometimes you even end up paying 2-3 times the same product, which is scary, especially once it's 3-4 years old.
So Build Your Wealth, which is stage 4 in the book, I guess that's all part of that, isn't it? Making sure that you're on top of your financial obligations.
Yeah, look, stage 3 and 4 are all about, stage 3 is about get yourself,
taking
control.
Make
sure you get yourself organised.
Yeah.
I know what you've got. And if we've got all our paperwork cluttered, our head feels cluttered. Stage 4 is look at all investments and look at the investments that suit you. Don't get some, I suppose, either go and get some advice, or B, look at yourself as a whole and say, how much risk am I willing to take? And
don't just try and emulate the next door neighbour.
Perfect. Yeah. 100% agree. Yeah. Look at your circumstances. What works for you? Again, sit down with your partner or with your family. And we always say, the success rate of doing it together, exponentially increases. Sit down and say, where are we today? Where do we want to go tomorrow? And what do we need to do to get there? Because sometimes you don't need to take substantial risks. It comes down to the basics, doing the basics well consistently over time. Not these knockout strategies that, we hear all the time. Just the simple stuff, the simple say, like you were saying earlier, get a high bearing interest account in a lot of cases, and put the right amount aside every single week instead of, trying to save too much on something that you can't sustain over long periods of time. It's all about the simple things.
And I love the final section, which is under the heading bonus gift for someone you love, but particularly numbers 3, 4 and 5. For couples having a baby, which as you know, because you're a new dad, young Ethan, and we wish him all the best in life and hope that there's no hiccups at all.
Thank you, Graham, for that.
Having a baby is beautiful, but then you go for couples facing divorce. Now, that's really where your assets get ripped up, 60% for her and 40% for you, but again, and I see so many couples arguing, if you're going to bring children into the world, you've got to be prepared to, pay up until they're able to go out and pay for themselves. As now you're saying, they're living with her, or her saying they're living with him. There's an obligation that too many people try and walk away from. And then the final one for someone approaching retirement, which, again, I would imagine tinged with happiness on one side that they're about to have unlimited freedoms, but also for some people a fair degree of tension as to where they're going to live, how they're going to support themselves. Again, a bit like coming off that, $150,000 a year income onto a pension of, a couple of $100 a week.
Look, one of the main reasons we use those stages is because in our own private practice, the one thing we see is exactly what you just finished saying, that we see when, I don't know whether it's a fortune or misfortune, that sometimes you see, let's say for retirement argument's sake, we see people that have done it so well, and when they get to that retirement, it's the most joyous part because they start travelling like crazy and they start really enjoying themselves. Whilst for others, it's the worst part because suddenly their income stream has stopped.
Yep.
And they didn't forecast to be there with that little bit of money, or they didn't plan for it. So in terms of divorce, we've seen a situation where, there's a lot of books on the emotional side of divorce, but how about the, like you were saying, how about the taking care of the kids post-wise? Yeah. How do you organise that? How much should go there? And we just realised that most money books were written around, I suppose, building wealth instead of being written around identifying the fact that, in certain stages of life is when we begin to think, or we think, okay, we need to focus on the money side of it.
Yeah.
And that's why we've sort of identified those stages. They're probably the key stages that we've seen in our own practice that people say, I need some help now, or at least I need, someone to point me in the right direction.
Yeah. Here's one, a question without notice. And again, I won't mention any names because I won't embarrass the couple, but I know a couple, and he retired, but then went back and did a little bit of consultancy work for the next 2 years. Yeah. But he's now in retirement. She's retired. They're both retired from very good jobs, but suddenly now no income coming in at all. They've got a very nice house, which I guess would be worth close to $2 million. But again, people say, you've got this big spiffy house, but it's only worth, as you know, $1 or $2 or $3 million if you sell it. You've still got to have somewhere to live. Now, they spend a lot of time agonising over at what rate do they spend the money they've got in the bank, because, are they going to live another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And I suppose you strike that too, people who hit that retirement thing, and it comes back to, as you quite correctly point out in the book, we do have to do some planning, but stepping into those retirement years, it's totally uncharted waters.
Yeah. Look, I haven't seen, and we've been doing this for a long time now, I haven't seen one retired couple, no matter, I suppose, what income level they retire at, that from a psychological standpoint, they don't have a major shift in their lifestyle. They suddenly go from working full-time and having, like we talked about earlier, a somewhat identity to what they did on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And suddenly they've got all this time, and it hits them, it hits them almost on the first 3 months where, okay, what do I do with all that time? And above and beyond that, have I got enough on a day-to-day basis to do what I used to do? Do I stop going to this restaurant or once a month, or can I afford that holiday that I used to? And it really, it usually takes about 6 months. It's a really interesting thing to see from I suppose from outside, where you just notice the change in them until about 6 months. Most of them will begin to deal with the circumstances they're in and begin to either seek the advice that they need to be able to planify it, because no one likes living on edge, not knowing whether you're spending too much or whether you have enough left over. And when they do that, suddenly their whole demeanour changes, and they suddenly, I suppose, endorse it or welcome retirement at a different level.
Now, you and I, very briefly, probably when we talk about retirement, we think about those who will be self-funded retirees. But there are those who will retire and will retire onto the pension. Now, for them, of course, they have other concerns which may not immediately hit them, but, there will come times when out of that pension, they've got to look at getting a new fridge, or, replacing the car, or even just down to, getting new tyres for the car. All of these become major issues too, don't they, in doing that family budgeting?
That's one of the main reasons why, particularly when we discuss retirement, we always say, I get asked this probably once a week, when's a good time for me to start planning for retirement? And
now,
bingo, it's, are you 25? You start planning for it now, just in case. And
well, at 25 now, aren't they? Because they're they're having 9% of their, or not so much 9% out of their wage, but 9% on top of their wage going into super. So from day one, there's a degree of planning for retirement. And again, if I can say it and take the words out of your mouth, people ought to keep an interest in their super, because that's real money. It's going to be very real at some stage in their life.
That's changed a lot. It's interesting, that whole sentiment towards super has changed enormously in the last 5 years. Thankfully, it's changed. People actually begin to notice, okay, how much am I paying for fees? Okay, what is my super fund really returning? How does it perform in these circumstances? So, 100% agree with that. They need to be conscious of it. Don't, as much, even if you do seek the advice from somebody, which is, is highly recommended, make sure you stay on top of it as well. By all means, let them take their advice and look at the options that they're offering. But at the end of the day, the options, the final decision is on you. So you should at least, if they're not educating you enough to get you to the level to make the right decisions, that's a problem in itself.
Yeah, it amazes me. You'll see people who have jumped through a couple of jobs, so they've got various little amounts of money in different super accounts, and they don't seem to have a care in the world about it, yet they'll watch every cent that comes in their pay packet. It's just a funny way to look at it. No, it's a terrific book, and I recommend it. It's called Your Family, Your Money, Real Money Advice for Families. It's by Anna Laura and Wilson Luna. And as you say, we can't start planning too early, even if we're like you and I, still just teenagers and got a long way ahead of us. But
I wish.
Yeah, Vanny. Is it going to be a good life ahead for Ethan? Is the world going to be okay financially?
I'm hoping, Graham. You never know what's around the corner, but so far so good. So can't complain so far.
Give him our love, and also give Anna Laura our love, won't you?
Graham,
thanks for your
very
time,
much
Wilson.
For having us on your show, and mate, please keep up the great work, huh?
Talk to you soon, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
All the best. There he is, Wilson Luna, and a good. You've probably seen him often on television talking money matters. Your family, your money, real money advice for families, and. Don't say you don't need the advice, because we all do. Talk tonight. I'll take that book home for the curly-head Sheila. Talk tonight, our number 13 12 69.